After an argument, my daughter canceled my flight, then abandoned me alone at Miami International Airport. No phone, no wallet, no way to ask for help. Just as panic overwhelmed me and I felt myself about to collapse, a man who looked like a billionaire, immaculately tailored suit, calm, composed bearing, approached and whispered, "Pretend to be my wife. My driver is on the way." Then he added, with a certainty that sent a chill down my spine, "Your daughter will regret leaving you here." He was right. But at that moment, I couldn't imagine how true those words would become. The worst part wasn't being abandoned. It was how Sable did it. She looked me straight in the eye, gave a cold smile, then clutched my handbag like a trophy. I stood frozen in the bright check-in area, surrounded by foreign languages. The air conditioning raised goosebumps on my skin. Harsh fluorescent lights stabbed my eyes. The scent of expensive perfume mixed with espresso made my empty stomach clench. I was 68, wearing a wrinkled beige silk blouse, feeling my blood pressure spike, numb fingertips, the warning signs of fainting. Just 15 minutes earlier, Dr. Sable Maddox had exploded at the check-in counter, shouting that I was a burden, draining her energy, and that she was tired of funding my luxuries. Luxuries? I was here because I'd saved every penny of my pension for 2 years just to fulfill a small dream, to begin a journey with a desert sunset, to remind myself my life wasn't confined to 4 silent walls. But Sable insisted on coming along, to make sure Mom doesn't waste money and come begging again. And I agreed, because some weak part of me still hoped the trip might bring us closer. The argument began over something trivial. I asked the airline staff if I could switch to a window seat. Sable took it as an insult because she paid for the trip. She leaned in close, her voice icy. "You're pathetic, always have been." Then she turned and smiled sweetly at the staff as if nothing had happened. And then she stabbed me straight through the heart. "Dad died because he wanted to escape from you. He just wanted to breathe in a world without your mediocrity." My husband, Calvin Maddox, died 25 years ago in a car accident. Since then, Sable had turned that pain into a weapon to punish me. I tried to breathe so I wouldn't cry, but she yanked the brown leather bag from my hand, the last gift my mother ever gave me, and walked away. "Sable, my documents," I called after her, my voice trembling. She didn't turn back. She went straight through security without a single glance. And I understood. The ticket in my hand was useless when my passport and papers were in the bag she had taken. She had planned it. She wanted to humiliate me one last time and abandon me in a foreign place. Panic surged. Denial, anger, then fear so strong my knees went weak. I approached a security officer, stammering an explanation. They looked at me with suspicion. One of them started making a call, and then I felt someone standing beside me. A tall man, neatly combed silver hair, a perfectly tailored gray suit, amber brown eyes keenly observant. He asked gently, "Are you having trouble, ma'am?" Before I could answer, he lowered his voice, urgent and firm. "Pretend to be my wife. The driver is coming. Trust me. Questions later." He took my hand lightly and whispered, "Your daughter will regret leaving you here. I promise." I looked at him, at the security officers approaching, at the vast, cold terminal, and made the most reckless decision of my life. I squeezed his hand and said, "Take me with you." Because in that moment, I realized I had spent my whole life waiting for someone else to save me, my husband, my daughter, and they had all abandoned me. Maybe it was time to walk on my own, by holding a stranger's hand, to see who I was without anyone to lean on. A glossy black Mercedes S-Class pulled up to the curb. The gloved driver opened the rear door. The man gestured, "After you." I slid into a cabin scented with new leather and polished wood. The car pulled away. Airport lights faded in the rear-view mirror, and reality hit, icy and sharp. I had just gotten into a stranger's car. "Breathe," he said. "I know this is crazy, but you're safe now." "Why are you helping me?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. He turned. In the dim light, I saw lines around his eyes, a thin scar across his brow, and the weariness of someone who had lost too much. "My name is Warren Devereaux," he said. "I'm 72. I run companies in Miami, New York, and Los Angeles, and I lost my wife 8 months ago." "I'm so sorry," I whispered. He nodded. "I saw your daughter take your bag. I saw that smile. I know that kind of cruelty. My son wears the same smile whenever he tries to outmaneuver me." "I need an exchange," he said calmly, adjusting his cuff. "Nothing immoral. I need you to pretend to be my wife, for a few hours, maybe a few days." He explained. The next day he was meeting extremely conservative investors. They didn't trust a widower to be stable. "My wife always appeared with me. Without her, I lose credibility. And I can't afford to lose this deal." He met my eyes. "It's worth $400 million. I was stunned. "You could hire an actress." "I tried, but they look exactly like what they are. Paid performers. No one believes them." He studied me longer. "But you have the eyes of someone who has truly lost. They'll believe you." He asked plainly, "Do you have any other options? Go back to the airport without documents? Call the daughter who just abandoned you? Or come with me, somewhere safe, eat a proper meal, and talk in the morning?" He was right. I had nowhere else to go. "If I agree," I asked softly, "what do I have to do tomorrow?" "Dress elegantly, smile beside me at dinner. No affection. Just the quiet familiarity of people who've known each other a long time. Don't contradict anything I say." Then he added, "I'll cover lodging, meals, a phone so you can contact anyone you wish, and when it's over, you get $15,000. $15,000. 5 months of my pension. "Why should I trust you?" I asked. He gave a faint smile. "You don't have to. Just ask yourself, do you have another choice?" Miami glittered ahead like an unfamiliar world. I looked at Warren and saw a loneliness I recognized, the kind that comes when your own child sees you as a burden. "All right," I said. "I'll be your wife, on one condition." "I'm listening." "You help me find out what my daughter has done. And when I know the truth, you help make sure she can never do this to anyone else again." Warren extended his hand. "We have a deal, Lorraine." I took it. And I knew I had just stepped into a turning point with no way back. I sat in the darkness of an unfamiliar room, my back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. For 25 years, I had lived as if serving a sentence, carrying a vague guilt over Calvin's death, allowing Sable's contempt to become my daily punishment, as though I deserved it. But that night, in the stillness of Miami, something inside me shifted. Maybe exhaustion, maybe rage down to the bone, or maybe because, for the first time in decades, someone looked at me not as a guilty mother, but as a human being, worth saving. I lay on sheets soft as clouds and slept deeply, the first sleep in years not haunted by my daughter's gaze. The next morning, sunlight filtered through silk curtains, dusting the floor in gold. The ocean beyond the balcony sparkled as if to remind me the world still existed, and so did I. A new resolve sparked, clear enough to surprise me. Sable wanted me to pay for the past? Then I would collect what the present owed me, with interest. Renee knocked with breakfast, Turkish coffee, fresh fruit, and delivered a line that made me laugh dryly. "You have 3 hours to become a billionaire's wife." I looked at myself in the mirror, disheveled silver hair, hollow eyes, deep lines, a woman who had been holding her breath too long. But Renee knew exactly what to do. She took me to a luxury boutique in Brickell. The staff's attitude changed instantly at the name Warren Devereaux. I tried on dozens of dresses, each costing more than months of my pension, until I stopped at a deep navy evening gown, elegant, perfectly fitted, and restoring a confidence I thought I'd lost. Moderate heels, a pearl necklace, hair swept up. I barely recognized myself, not because I'd become someone else, but because it had been so long since I dressed for myself rather than to please others. Back at the villa, Warren was swimming, each stroke strong and precise, as if washing something away. When he emerged, I noticed faint scars on his body, untold stories. He looked me over and nodded. Perfect. They'll believe it instantly. Warren, I called after him, I need to know about your wife, the role I'm playing. His expression softened. Marianne died of cancer. 8 months of pain that drained everything, emotionally and financially. Experimental treatment in Switzerland cost a fortune. He sank into a chair, looking older. Darius sees that as weakness. He wants me to sign power of attorney while I'm alive. I refused, so he spread rumors that I'm incompetent. Warren let out a humorless laugh. Tomorrow is my only chance to prove I'm still capable. But the investors are extremely conservative. A lonely widower inspires no confidence. They think I'll act desperate and reckless. He stared at the water. And maybe I did, letting you into my car. I smirked. Fair point. We rehearsed all afternoon. He explained the company, luxury textiles and spices, headquarters in Charleston, branches in 15 countries. He taught me partners' names, habits, and our unified fictional history. We met at a conference in Rio 30 years ago. He has a son, Darius. I have a daughter, Sable. Honeymoon in Santorini. Strangely, amid the smooth lies, truth slipped in. Warren spoke of Marianne's love of gardening, hands that could coax roses from desert soil, of her final days when she held his hand and said, "Don't let Darius destroy what we built." I told him about Calvin Maddox, an exceptional civil engineer who understood the limits of bridges, but not his own. I spoke of debts after Calvin's death and how I repaid them silently, even selling the farm where I grew up. Sable never knew the real cost. I told Warren I kept every receipt, every transfer, in a box at home, because I always knew I'd need to prove I wasn't a useless mother. Warren asked softly, "Did she accuse you of anything else?" I nodded. At the airport, Sable said her father died trying to escape me, that I was a burden. He was silent, then asked like a needle, "And you believed that for 25 years?" I looked at the dark, glittering water. Not anymore. Now I know Calvin died drunk, driving nearly 100 miles an hour on an empty road after his project collapsed. Too arrogant to ask for help, too weak to face failure. Does Sable know? No, but maybe it's time. Warren nodded slowly. After dinner tomorrow, I'll transfer the $15,000 as promised, but I can help you more. With what? My lawyers will protect your assets in the U.S., ensure Sable can't declare you incompetent, can't sell your house, can't seize anything. His voice dropped. I have a feeling this fight is just beginning. And he was right, though we had no idea how brutal it would become. Imagine this. A day earlier, I was an abandoned old woman at an airport. No documents, no money, no one beside me. Hours later, I was in a Coral Gables villa, in an evening gown, preparing for a $400 million dinner. The paradox was this. The more luxury I wore, the clearer I saw reality. What made me tremble wasn't wealth or fine dining. It was knowing that somewhere, Sable still thought I was the same woman, silent, fearful, easy to crush. And that knowledge steadied me. That evening, as I got ready, my phone buzzed. A message from Sable. "I've reported you missing. I filed for emergency guardianship. I'm pushing temporary control over your assets. Come home and cooperate, or you'll never control anything again." I read it twice and smiled, for the first time in 25 years. Because Sable didn't know. I had evidence, allies, and the weak woman she once knew died at Miami Airport. That night, we went to the top-floor restaurant at Fontainebleau, Miami Beach, arriving in a Bentley because Warren said the Mercedes was too ordinary. 3 Arab investors in their 60s waited, eyes sharp as blades. Warren introduced me in Arabic, then English. His hand rested lightly on my back, protective, appropriately intimate. When he pulled out my chair, our eyes met, and I saw genuine gratitude. Most of the conversation was in Arabic. I smiled at the right moments, sipped water, listened. Ibrahim twisted his ring when thinking. Mahmoud laughed loudly and slapped the table when agreeing. Faisal barely spoke, watching like a hawk. It was Faisal who turned to me in accented English. "Mrs. Devereaux, your husband says you have hotel experience. Tell us." Silence fell. Warren tensed. I set my glass down, breathed slowly, and chose truth. Because only truth survives that gaze. I spoke of 32 years in hospitality, from front desk to operations manager of a 4-star Florida hotel, overseeing over 90 staff, 94% occupancy when I left, 8 consecutive years of excellence awards. Ibrahim asked, "Why did you leave?" I glanced at Warren, saw the exhaustion beneath his mask, and answered, "My husband died. I had to raise my daughter. When she grew up, I realized I'd forgotten who I was beyond mother and widow. I retired early and disappeared." The silence changed. Mahmoud stopped laughing. Faisal tilted his head, reassessing. Finally, Ibrahim nodded. Honesty is rare in our business. The mood softened. They discussed a boutique hotel chain across the Middle East. Warren presented projections and strategy. Then Ibrahim asked off-script, "Does your wife agree with this investment?" Warren froze. I glanced at the tablet. 30 years of experience became instinct. I said calmly, "Miami projections are overly optimistic. Oman is undervalued, its potential untapped." The room went still. Warren looked at me, stunned, then impressed. Ibrahim laughed. "Warren, your wife understands business better than half our advisors. We'll sign, but on the condition she reviews the Oman plan." 3 hours later, we returned to the villa. The $400 million deal was signed. I, the woman abandoned at the airport, had helped close it. Warren poured lemonade. We sat on the terrace overlooking the sea. I said softly, "I'm sorry. I broke your script." Warren laughed genuinely. "Broke it? You saved me. Ibrahim is checking if you're real, and you passed." I smiled. 30 years in the industry taught me to spot flaws." Warren shook his head. "Not instinct, talent." Then he set his glass down, his voice slower. "I have a proposal. This time, not pretend." "What kind?" "Marry me, for real. 6 months, a legal contract. Hear me out." He laid out terms. $850,000 into a private account no one could touch. I would live here as an advisor, earning $35,000 a month. Full legal protection, ensuring Sable couldn't touch my U.S. assets. The reason? Darius was trying to push him out. A real marriage with a wife active in business would crush the narrative of weakness and isolation. And because he saw in me someone who understood his world and could help protect it. After 6 months, an amicable divorce, I'd keep the money, connections, independence, return to the U.S. or stay, my choice. And he promised Sable would never make me feel small again. I looked at him. "I have conditions. First, his lawyers must investigate Sable. If she sold my house illegally, forged documents, or committed crimes, I wanted proof." Warren nodded. "Done." Second, this was a business marriage. Separate rooms, separate lives, public appearances only when necessary, mutual respect. Fully agreed. Third, the hardest. I said, "If one day I became a burden, if he regretted it, let me go. I would never live as someone else's burden again." Warren set his glass down, stepped closer, placed his hands on my shoulders as if to keep me from falling. "Lorraine, you are not a burden. Never were. Your daughter built that story to justify her cruelty." He met my eyes. "I saw you today. Brilliant, strong, deserving of a life reclaimed." He smiled. "I accept everything, but I have one condition." "What is it?" "You must promise to stop apologizing for existing." Tears welled, not from sadness, but from a feeling I'd almost forgotten the name of. Maybe hope. "We have a deal," I whispered. 3 days later, Warren and I signed our marriage registration papers at a Miami government office, exactly as the 6-month contract required. The ceremony was cold and efficient, more like an administrative transaction than an emotional milestone. Only a few professional witnesses stood there, signed their names, and observed. No flowers, no music, no romance, just pen strokes laid down on paper. And those papers, strangely enough, changed the trajectory of my life. When I returned to the villa as Lorraine Devereaux, I photographed the marriage certificate and sent Sable exactly one message. I'm alive. I'm married. And from this moment on, you have no power over me anymore. I'll see you in the U.S. when I decide to return. The reply came instantly. Have you lost your mind? I looked at the screen and let out a small laugh. Maybe. But it was the clearest, most lucid kind of crazy I had ever had in my life. The next 4 months were the most intense 4 months I had ever lived. Warren wasn't joking when he said I would be working for real. On the second day after the marriage registration, I was already sitting in meetings reviewing design plans for hotels under construction. At 68, my schedule suddenly became more demanding than anything I had ever believed I still had the strength to endure. I woke at 6 in the morning, drank coffee as fast as I could, then stepped into online meetings with architects across 3 continents. Lunch turned into working lunches. I was introduced not as Mr. Devereaux's wife, but as an operations advisor. And then I realized something. What I had once treated as a past with no remaining value had never died. It had only been asleep. 30 years managing the Excelsior Hotel hadn't merely kept me alive. It had sharpened my eye for efficiency, systems, and detail into something that was almost instinct. I took the Omen project, the one I had blurted out a comment about at the investors' dinner, and turned it into a full feasibility study. When I presented it, Sheikh Ibrahim was so impressed he demanded that I fly over to meet local partners and report directly. I flew alone to Muscat, wearing the beige suit Renee had chosen, carrying a tablet loaded with a presentation I had refined for 3 straight weeks. When I entered the boardroom, 10 men sitting across from me looked at me as if I were merely decoration brought along to complete the image. But 15 minutes later, they were taking notes. 30 minutes later, they were asking me about seasonal occupancy rates and cost controls for operations, and I closed that deal on my own. When I returned to Miami, Warren was waiting. He had prepared non-alcoholic champagne, and his smile made his tired face brighten. "You're extraordinary," Warren said. "I was afraid you'd be intimidated, but you were genuinely outstanding." He poured more champagne and continued, as if he still couldn't quite believe it. "Ibrahim says you have more strategic vision than the advisors he pays $50,000 for each report." I took a small sip, and in that exact moment, I felt something that had been gone for a long time. Come back. Pride. Not pride from pleasing someone else, but pride because I had proven I was still me, the capable woman with value, with a voice. Meanwhile, back in the United States, Sable began to lose control. Yolanda updated me piece by piece. Sable filed motions in court, trying to declare that I was being manipulated by a foreign man. She tried to freeze my bank accounts. She tried to finalize the sale of my house. But this time, Sable ran straight into a wall she never expected. The legal team Warren had assembled. 3 attorneys, sharp, cold, and ruthless in the precise way the job required. They dismantled every one of Sable's moves with documents I didn't even know existed. Then the truth hit. Warren's legal team uncovered enough evidence to take Sable to court. Everything was recorded in a report so thick, my hands trembled when I held it. I didn't read it once. I read it again and again, until the last layer of denial inside me finally died. In a video meeting, the lead attorney, Grant Holloway, spoke in a steady tone, as if delivering a weather report. "We can file criminal charges. Forgery, embezzlement, and fraud. She could face 2 to 6 years in prison." I stayed silent for a long time, eyes fixed on the pages in front of me. That was my daughter. The child I once held in my arms. The teenager who once cried on my shoulder when her father died. And now the woman who had tried to take everything I owned. Finally, I spoke very softly. Not yet. Hold everything. But don't act. Warren stared at me, genuinely surprised. Why? She deserves to be punished. I drew in a deep breath and looked Warren straight in the eye. If I act right now, people will say you manipulated me. They'll say I'm taking revenge out of emotion. I need to go back to the U.S., look her in the eyes, and let her see that I'm her equal, not her victim. I paused, my voice firmer. If after that she still tries to destroy me, then I will strike back. Warren gave a faint smile, dim but full of respect. You really are a strategist. I tightened my lips, feeling, for the first time in my life, that I could say that without fearing judgment. 30 years dealing with demanding hotel guests is very useful, I said. Sable is just another guest. The only difference is that this time, I can fire her. I need you to understand one thing. Those 4 months weren't just starting life over. They were 4 months in which I learned how to stop asking permission to exist. Some nights, I stood alone on the balcony, listening to the waves below, and wondered, if Warren hadn't walked up to me at Miami airport that day, would I still be alive right now? And if I were still alive, would I be barely breathing through a life where my daughter held my throat with guilt? Just thinking about it was enough to make my spine go cold. But that same realization also made one thing clearer than ever. Sable could drag me down again, if I allowed it. And I would not allow it. That night, I sat alone in front of my laptop and wrote a letter. Not to Sable, but to myself. I listed every sacrifice, every lie I had swallowed, every time I made myself smaller so my daughter could feel bigger, not to complain, but to remember, so I would never forget the price of loving a child who turned affection into control. While the battle in the U.S. grew tighter, my life in Miami began to bloom in ways I had never imagined. Renee and I became close friends. She taught me how to cook Central American dishes and told me about her life. A failed marriage in Mexico, then the decision to leave, to run, to start over in Miami. I met other women at social events, each of them an outsider in some way, like me. We formed a small group, meeting every Thursday for coffee and conversation. Ingrid, a Danish woman of 65, said she divorced at 60 after years of abuse and now owned a thriving art gallery. Yuki, a Japanese woman of 71, ran 3 restaurants after her children abandoned her, children who once called her a burden. Their stories were different, but the pain was the same. Each of us had been made to feel invisible, disposable, until we stood up and demanded our space back. One day, Ingrid held her teacup, looked straight at me and said, "You know, Lorraine, the loneliness of being abandoned hurts far more than the loneliness you choose. I'd rather be alone and be myself than be surrounded by people who make me smaller." I held on to that sentence like a lifeline. As we entered the 4th month of the marriage, Warren called me into his office. His tone was calm and serious, exactly like the day we met. "The contract has 2 months left. I need to know what you plan to do after that." The question stunned me because I truly had options. I had money, I had work, I had a life of my own. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I need to go back to the U.S. to settle everything with Sable, to close that chapter." Then I looked at Warren and said each word clearly. "I think I want to return, not as a wife, but as a partner. I want to keep working. I want to finish the Omen project." Warren smiled, a rare smile that made him look much younger. "Then we'll have a lot to discuss about extending the contract." But fate always finds a way to step in, right when you start believing you've finally gained control over your life. 3 days later, while I was reviewing the design plans for the Muscat Hotel, my phone vibrated. Yolanda was calling. Her voice was tight as a drawn wire. "Lorraine, Sable is coming to Miami. She bought a ticket. She lands tomorrow." The blood in my veins felt like it turned to ice. How does she know where I'm living? I asked, my voice gone hoarse. I don't know, Yolanda spoke quickly, but she's furious. She's posting online, saying she's going to rescue her mother from an international con man. She's gathering people, turning this into a spectacle. She paused for a beat. Lorraine, she's coming to fight. I hung up, gripping the phone in my hand, my breathing heavy. Sable wants a war? Then she will have a war. But this time the battlefield is mine, and I'm holding weapons she doesn't even know exist. And if God still has mercy to give, he'd better give it to her, because I have none left. Sable arrived like a storm. No doorbell, no warning. She waited until the flower delivery man was let through the gate, slipped in behind him, and walked straight into the villa as if the place belonged to her. The sharp crack of her heels against polished stone echoed with every step, dry, brutal, like a slap across my face. At the time, I was in the living room reviewing contracts. Warren was in his office. Renee rushed over, face drained white, but I lifted my hand to stop her. I inhaled deeply, smoothed the front of my ivory linen dress, and stepped into the entry hall. Sable stood there, messy blonde hair, dark circles under her eyes, makeup smeared as if she'd been crying and wiping it away in a hurry. Wrinkled jeans, a disheveled look, not a trace of her usual polish. But what made my skin go cold were her eyes, a smoldering hatred that had burned for years, now flaring into open fire. I thought I'd have to call the police to get into the fortress of my mother's billionaire husband, she screamed, her voice razor sharp. In the past, that sentence would have shattered me, but not now. Sable, I said calmly, you've just trespassed on private property. You didn't even ring the doorbell. A doorbell? She mimicked me, then lunged forward, stabbing her finger toward my face. You vanish for 4 months, marry a stranger, and now you're teaching me manners? I know what you're doing. You sold yourself to this rich old man, and now you think you can humiliate me, erase me. Right then, Warren appeared on the staircase. Sable's gaze ignited into pure hatred. So it's you, she sneered, the con man who brainwashed my mother. Warren's voice was cold as stone. Watch your words. I am your mother's legal husband, with full documentation and witnesses. Sable laughed bitterly. My mother is 68, lost at an airport, and suddenly marries a billionaire. What judge wouldn't call that manipulation? Any judge will look at the facts, I answered evenly. The fact is, you deliberately abandoned me, canceled my ticket, took my documents and my money, then disappeared, just to teach me a lesson. Yes, Sable screamed, and the last mask finally shattered. So you'd see you can't keep draining me, controlling me, using me like your personal ATM. I went still for a few seconds. I controlled you? Sable shook with rage, eyes blazing red. You made me feel guilty my whole life, guilty for being born, for needing anything, for surviving while Dad died trying to escape you. Your father didn't run, I said. Don't lie, she shrieked, then grabbed a ceramic vase from the table and hurled it straight at the wall. Crash, the explosion of shards. Renee rushed in, panicked. Warren started to move, but I raised my hand to stop them. No, I needed to end this right here. You killed my father, Sable said, her voice low and venomous, with your nagging, your bitterness, your mediocrity. Dad was brilliant. He could have gone far, but you dragged him down, trapped him in that small life with a small wife. When he tried to breathe, you pushed him onto that road. You're wrong, I said slowly. I was home when your father left, you know that. Yes, she ground out. You were home like always, resentful, heavy, always a burden. The air thickened. Warren watched me like he wanted to intervene, but I raised my hand again. I didn't need anyone to save me anymore. This was the moment to say everything. But then Sable bent down, pulled a stack of papers from her bag, and lifted her head with that familiar cold composure. I came prepared. I have evidence you're being exploited. This marriage is a scam. He's only after Mom's money. or whatever's left after she wasted Grandma's fortune. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Grandma's fortune? I repeated, my voice cracking. You mean the farm I sold? Yes, Sable snapped. The farm worth $2,800,000 that you sold. The money vanished. You didn't invest, didn't build, didn't plan. Where is it? It all went to paying your father's debts, I said. Sable froze. Liar. I stepped closer, not avoiding her. No. Your father owed contractors, suppliers, and investors more than $2,400,000. I discovered it after the funeral. If I didn't pay, they would sue the widow, seize the house, erase our family name. Sable's hands clenched tight. Liar. The insurance money paid for my college. I held her gaze. The insurance money was only $85,000, enough for the funeral and 3 months of expenses. Your tuition was $5,300 a month for 5 years. Who do you think paid the rest? I stepped closer. I worked double shifts, skipped meals so you'd have food when you came home. I wore old clothes so you wouldn't be ashamed standing next to me at graduation. Sable went pale but tried to stay hard. If you really did all that, you would have bragged about it years ago. Because I loved you more than my pride, I said. I believed one day you'd understand. Love doesn't need to scream to be real. Love? Sable laughed, and the laugh snapped in half. You call suffocating me love? Making me feel like I owed you for existing? I never asked you for anything. You didn't have to ask, I said softly. You demanded with silence. Sable jabbed a trembling finger. You always play the saint, always the victim, always comparing me to Dad. I'm nothing but his shadow in your eyes. And in that moment, I understood. She didn't hate me for money. She hated me because she'd spent her whole life competing with a dead man. And I, trying to fill the hole Calvin left, had accidentally used his memory as a weapon that wounded my child. You're right, I said. Sable went rigid. Mom, I did, I continued. I turned your father into the measure of everything. That was my fault. For a second, her shoulders softened, yet I didn't stop. My voice was cold and clear. But that fault does not justify you selling my house illegally, forging my signature, borrowing money in my name, and abandoning me in a foreign country. Sable stammered, I was going to come back for you. Liar, Warren cut in, stepping down with a tablet. We have proof. Bank records show you transferred $680,000 into a joint account with your husband, and messages between you planning to keep your mother out of the country long enough to legalize everything. Sable turned gray. How did you get that? I looked at her. Because you underestimated me. You don't know who I become when I stop apologizing for being alive. The hatred in Sable's eyes wavered, then gave way to fear. She backed up, stumbling slightly on the rug. You're lying! You can't have my private messages! Warren enlarged the screen and pushed it toward her. Line after line was visible. Delay the flight. Need 2 more days to sell the house. If Mom comes back early, then say she's mentally unstable. 2 doctor friends ready to sign a capacity report. Sable stared, lips trembling. This is a violation of privacy. Admissible, a man's voice said from the doorway. Grant Holloway walked in, gray suit, leather briefcase in hand. Mrs. Lorraine granted me full authority to investigate all criminal activity connected to her assets. All evidence was collected legally. He set the briefcase on the table, opened it. Forged power of attorney notarized through bribery. The notary has confessed. Fraudulent sale of property. Undervaluation to evade taxes. Credit applications using the victim's ID. And more than $120,000 in auto loan funds misappropriated. He removed his glasses and looked directly at Sable. There is sufficient basis to charge fraud, forgery, and embezzlement, sentencing exposure from 6 to 12 years in prison. Sable clutched the edge of a chair, her face ashen. No, I'm a doctor. I have a reputation. Do you? I said quietly. When the medical board receives these documents, they will investigate. Your license could be suspended or revoked." Sable looked at me as if I were a monster. "Are you really going to do that? Destroy your own daughter?" The villa fell silent. Warren, Renee, and Mr. Holloway waited for my answer. I took 3 deep breaths, slow and even, like the old days behind the front desk at the Excelsior Hotel. Then I said, truthfully enough to hurt, "I don't know." Something flashed in Sable's eyes, surprise, because no matter what, a part of me still remembered. The sleepless nights when she had fevers, the elementary school drawings I kept in an old shoebox. Tears ran down Sable's cheeks, but they weren't remorse. They were rage cornered by a wall. "So this is blackmail," she screamed. "If I don't obey, you'll ruin me." "No," I said. I walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old leather folder. "I brought this from the U.S. You never knew it existed." I looked straight at her. "And today, I'm giving you something you've never given me. The truth." And the moment I held that folder, I suddenly realized my hands weren't shaking like they did at the airport. That day, I shook because I was terrified of being left behind. Now I was shaking because I understood. Just a few pages in this folder were enough to break Sable's entire life, her reputation, her career, everything she clung to, so she could believe she was above me. The frightening part wasn't that I had the power to do it. It was that I had begun to wonder, if she still felt no remorse, would I be ruthless enough to pull the lever all the way down? I placed the brown leather folder into Sable's hands. She took it as if it were something hot, then opened it. Her fingers shook so hard the paper edges whispered against each other. Inside was everything. College tuition invoices, bank transfer receipts, Calvin's debt settlement contracts, the paperwork for selling my mother's farm, every item recorded in full, organized by year, by month, exactly the way I had forced myself to do it, as if missing even a single sheet would mean my entire life could be denied. The last page was the autopsy report, the one paper I had never shown anyone, not even as people looked at me like a sinner for 25 years. Sable read the first line, then stopped. Then she read on. "Cause of death? Traumatic brain injury due to a motor vehicle accident. Blood test results. Blood alcohol concentration 4 times the legal limit. Conclusion. Severe intoxication of the driver." She read it once, then read it again. Her hands shook harder, the paper rubbing together like the sound of dry branches snapping. "No," she whispered. "Dad didn't drink that much. You're making this up." I kept my voice steady, as if the moment I softened even slightly, the truth would be dragged back into the shadows. "The original report is still on file at the County Medical Examiner's office. Case number 41780, I said. "You can verify it yourself." Sable looked up at me, as if still searching for a crack she could slip through. I continued, each sentence something I had held inside my chest for 25 years. "Your father left the house at 10 p.m., after he learned his project had collapsed. He drank an entire bottle of whiskey, the bottle he'd saved for an anniversary, then drove into the night at a reckless speed." I swallowed hard. My voice broke on the next sentence, even though I tried to hold it back. "Your father didn't run from me," I said. "He ran from his own shame." I tried to stay calm, but my hands were still ice cold. "Calvin was brilliant," I went on, "but he was also arrogant, impulsive, unable to admit mistakes. When the project collapsed and he realized how many people had lost everything because of him, he couldn't bear to face it. And finally, the words I had locked in my throat burst out, echoing through the wide villa. "And I hid the truth from you, because you were only 15. I took a deep breath. My voice dropped, but each word grew heavier. I swallowed the truth, swallowed the anger, swallowed the unfairness of having to protect the honor of the man who left me in ashes. I worked myself into exhaustion, forgot what rest even was, because you needed both a mother and a father when he was never truly either." Sable collapsed onto the sofa. The folder slipped from her hands, and the papers scattered across the floor like the shards of a funeral torn open again, right here in this very house. "I didn't know," she whispered, hollow. I looked at her without blinking. "Because you never asked," I replied. "Because blaming me was easier." I kept my voice from shaking, even as my throat tightened into a knot. "So what now?" I asked. "Are you going to sue me? Destroy me?" I glanced around the room. Warren stood motionless. Renee was barely breathing. Mr. Holloway wore the calm of someone accustomed to watching families claw each other apart. Then I looked back at Sable. "I'm going to give you a choice," I said slowly, weighing every word the way I once weighed every dollar I had to stretch to raise her. "Return every dollar you took. Legalize the sale of the house or buy it back at market value. Cancel the loans taken in my name. Return the car you registered under my name, including interest." Sable shook her head, her voice breaking apart. "I don't have that much money." "Then sell what you bought with it," I said. "Borrow, refinance, do whatever you need to do. You're a doctor. You have income. Pay it back over 5 years if you must. But you will pay it back." She swallowed, staring at me as if I were a stranger. "If I do that, you won't file charges?" she asked. I paused, because I knew this was the place where a mother's heart would normally soften, but this time I did not allow myself to fall into the old trap. "If you do," I said, "and if you publicly admit what you did and apologize." I stopped, choosing each word, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted her to hear them clearly. "I won't file charges, but from this point forward, our relationship is over. You will only be my daughter, on paper, by blood. You will inherit nothing. You will have no voice in my life, no authority over me ever again." Sable's voice shattered completely. "But I'm your only daughter." I met her eyes and didn't look away. "And I was your only mother," I said. "And you left me at the airport, like trash." This time, her tears were real. Her shoulders shook violently. A part of me, the part that had been a mother for 33 years, wanted to step forward, hold her, forgive her, and slide back into my old role, endure so the home stays quiet. But I didn't. I chose to keep my dignity. Mr. Holloway gathered the documents and spoke crisply. "You have 72 hours to decide. After that, we proceed with criminal charges." Sable staggered out of the house without looking back. The door closed, and I collapsed into the chair she had just sat in, sobbing, harder than any time since Calvin's funeral. Warren sat down beside me, silent for a long time. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "Then why? Does it hurt this much?" I blurted out. Warren looked at me, gentle but firm. "Because being a mother isn't a switch you can turn off. But it has a limit. The point where, at last, you have to protect yourself. And today, you found that point." I sat in the heavy, stone-like silence of an irreversible choice, and strangely enough, I had never felt freer. The next 3 days were the longest 3 days I had ever lived. Not because the house was quiet, because that quiet had a sound. It rang in my ears whenever I saw the empty chair, whenever I walked past the hallway where the ceramic vase had shattered. I didn't know whether Sable was hiding, breaking down, or preparing another strike. And the most frightening thing was realizing I was still waiting. Not waiting to forgive, waiting to see who she would choose to become after the truth had been stripped bare. 3 heavy days passed. Sable didn't call, didn't text, didn't respond. Mr. Holloway called me each day, asking whether we should file yet. I asked for another 24 hours, then another 24, clinging to a hope as thin as a hair that Sable would choose to do the right thing. On the 4th day, Warren called me into his office. He sat behind his large wooden desk, tense, hands clasped together. His face was so serious my stomach tightened. "I need to tell you something," he began, "and it will change everything between us." I stood still. I had lived in his world for 4 months, long enough to know that sentences like that rarely led to good news. "What?" I asked. "Do you remember the day we met at the airport?" Warren said, "when I told you I needed a legal wife to appear in meetings? That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth." I stood up immediately, facing him. "Explain." Warren exhaled. "My son Darius isn't just trying to take over the company. He filed a petition in court, claiming I'm mentally incompetent. He says my grief has impaired my judgment. And here, the law tends to lean toward the children." "But you're completely lucid," I said. "You and I both know that." "We know," he replied. "But Darius hired 3 psychiatrists willing to certify the opposite. If he wins, I lose control of the company, my accounts, my assets, even my freedom of movement." His voice sank, like a confession he could barely swallow. Our marriage wasn't only a business arrangement. It was legal evidence of capacity. A man who can marry, sign contracts, maintain a stable relationship is much harder to declare incompetent. I stood frozen. He had used me, more subtly than Sable, but still, he had used me. "You manipulated me," I said. "Not the way you think," Warren answered, stepping around the desk. "Everything I gave you was real. The money, the work, the protection, the respect. I only hid part of the reason. I'm sorry." "Why tell me now?" I asked, my voice going cold. "Because the court just ruled." Warren handed me a packet of documents. Darius's petition had been dismissed. The judge cited Warren's recent marriage and my active business participation as evidence of full mental capacity. "I'm free," Warren said quietly, "and you saved me, without even knowing it." I stared at the attached English translation, read it once, then twice, then 3 times, afraid that if I blinked, the words would disappear. "So now, you don't need me anymore," I said. "Legally? No," he admitted. Then he stepped closer, slower and more honest. "But outside the law, I do. You brought life back into this house, intelligence into the work, and companionship I didn't know I needed." "The contract has 6 weeks left," Warren said. "But I want to propose something else. Not another contract, not an extension. A real beginning. No roles, no obligations, just 2 people, if they choose, building something truthful." I said nothing. Part of me wanted to snap that he was like every other man, but the part of me that had grown over these 4 months understood. He was only trying to survive the way I once did. "I need time to think," I said. "Of course," Warren replied. "But know this, what I feel isn't strategy. It's real." I left the office, my mind spinning. I stood by the window staring at the glittering ocean and realized I was no longer the fragile woman who climbed into that Mercedes 4 months ago just to survive. This woman wanted to live fully. My phone vibrated, an unknown number, a U.S. area code. "Mom!" Sable's voice trembled. "I need to see you. Please, can you come to the hotel where I'm staying?" My first instinct was to refuse, but her voice, shaking, exhausted, rough, stopped me. "Which hotel?" I asked. "Fontainebleau, room 2847. Please, Mom, this is important." I ended the call, still gripping the phone. On one side was Warren with his half-kept confession. On the other was Sable with her desperate plea. I went downstairs and found Warren reading documents. "Sable wants to meet," I said. "I'm going." Warren stood immediately. "I'll drive you," he said, "and wait outside the lounge." We rode in silence. When we arrived, Warren lightly took my hand. Just a touch, enough to remind me I was no longer alone in this fight. "Whatever you decide, about her, about me, about your life," he said, "choose what you truly want, not what's easy, not what others expect." I stepped out of the car, heart pounding, took the elevator to the 28th floor. I knocked on the door of room 2847. The door opened. Sable stood there, hair in a messy bun, oversized sweatshirt, face swollen from crying, and on the sofa beside her sat Miles, her husband, a lawyer who had helped her file paperwork and cover her tracks. I stopped at the threshold and spoke plainly, without detours. "If he's here, I'm not coming in. He needs to leave." Sable spun toward him, as if shoved to the edge of a cliff. "Miles, get out!" she screamed, loud enough that he stood up and walked out without another word. The door shut. Sable collapsed onto the sofa and broke into sobs, her whole body shaking violently. "He left me," she choked out. "When he found out you have enough evidence to press charges, Miles packed his bags and left. He said he's not risking his career over my family tragedy." I crossed my arms, standing still, forcing down the old instinct in me, the instinct to rush forward and hold her. "So you called me here for pity?" I asked. "No." Sable looked up, eyes flooded. "For forgiveness. A real apology. Not because I'm cornered, but because—" her voice splintered. "Because I finally understand what I did." "Understand how?" I asked, my voice cold as ice. Sable wiped her tears, hoarse now but no longer defensive. "I read everything you gave me, every receipt, every payment, every number. You worked nearly 10 years to pay for my education. You sold Grandma's farm to protect Dad's honor, and I turned it all into a weapon against you." I nodded. "Because blaming me was easier than facing the truth. You spent 25 years idolizing a man who didn't deserve it. And admitting that also means you have to accept you aren't perfect. You're just human." The room was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. "You're a good doctor. You have talent," I said. "But you became cruel, selfish, and so obsessed you turned everything into a competition between us that never even existed. You forgot how to be decent." "I know," Sable whispered. "I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'll pay everything back. I'll sell the car, borrow money, work extra shifts. I'll meet every condition you gave me." I sat across from her, exhausted. "Why? Because Miles left you? Because you're lonely?" Sable shook her head and looked straight at me. "Because I realized you were lonely too. And even lonely, you never abandoned me, until I forced you to." We sat there, mother and daughter, separated by 4 months and 25 years of pain. I knew forgiveness couldn't come immediately, but sometimes time can do what words cannot. People like to tell forgiveness is something beautiful, but the truth is, forgiveness often begins when endurance has hit the bottom. I understood that if I kept being a mother the old way, absorbing all her wrongs into myself, I would bury the rest of my life. And the biggest choice wasn't forgive or not, but could I dare to keep living as a free woman, even if people called me cold? 2 years later, I sat on the balcony of my Coral Gables apartment, watching the sunset drop over Biscayne Bay. Beside me was the report for the Devereaux Boutique Hotel, opened 3 months earlier. 91% occupancy, a 4.8-star rating, first quarter profits above projections. Renee, now the general manager of the Miami branch, texted that a guest in room 304 was asking for me. I smiled. That was the kind of busy I liked. Warren brought out 2 cups of cardamom tea. He was a little older, but far lighter. He asked about the Key West hotel design. I said today, I wanted to move slowly. Our contract marriage had ended 18 months earlier, but no one ever mentioned divorce. Warren only asked, "Do you want to go to dinner?" We went, and the next day we worked as usual. No dramatic confessions, only companionship and respect. "Darius called," Warren said. "He wants to reconcile." I asked what Warren told him. Warren replied, "The door opens when he offers a sincere apology, not when he wants to negotiate." He smiled. "I learned from you that dignity is not something you bargain with." Then my phone buzzed. A video call from Yolanda. She turned the camera. Sable stood there, short hair, bare face, simple button-down shirt, holding the familiar folder. "I brought the final payment," Sable said. "All loans are fully repaid, principal and interest. Aunt Eleanor witnessed it. Yolanda confirmed, down to the last cent. My throat tightened. I knew she had sold her apartment, lived in rentals, taken extra shifts, lived frugally to repay what she had taken. Sable hesitated. Mom, then corrected herself immediately. Lorraine. She said she didn't dare hope I would see her as my daughter again. She only wanted me to know she was trying to become the kind of person I deserved in my life. I said I saw it and respected it, but trust takes a very long time. Sable nodded. She would be there when I was ready. I ended the call. Warren asked, "Will you forgive her?" I answered honestly, "I don't know. Maybe not completely, but I can give her the chance to prove she has changed." 3 months later, I founded the New Beginnings Project, a free training center for women over 60, computer skills, hotel management, professional cooking, basic administration. The first class had 18 students. A 73-year-old woman asked me if I was afraid to start over. I said I had been, but courage is choosing not to let fear drive you. The program grew quickly. More classes, more branches. Yuki opened one in Tokyo. Ingrid arranged internships at her gallery. We became a network of women walking out of the shadows together. Sable came to the opening of the second branch in Atlanta. She didn't approach me. She simply volunteered all day, making coffee, setting chairs, helping older women fill out forms. When the ceremony ended, our eyes met. No words, no smile, only something fragile, but real. A beginning. Now I'm 70, dividing my time between Miami, Key West, and short trips to Oman. Warren is beside me as a true companion. We have separate rooms, separate lives, but still share dinner when we can. Darius finally apologized to his father. They are rebuilding their relationship. And I understand now that starting over doesn't mean erasing the past. It means choosing what you carry forward and what you leave behind. I think of Calvin without guilt now, but with understanding. We did the best we could with what we had. Sable still texts every Sunday, talking about patience and therapy. I don't always reply, but I always read. Forgiveness may not be complete, but witnessing someone truly try to change, that is something I can give. Last week, I received a package, an old photo album restored, my childhood on the farm, my wedding, rare shots of Calvin smiling, and Sable as a little girl. A note was attached. I thought you'd want to keep your memories, not because of expectation or guilt, but because they belong to you. I held the album and cried, not from sadness, but from understanding. Memory is what we keep. The future is what we choose. And I choose a future where I wake to Miami waves, build shelters for travelers, teach women to reclaim their worth, sip tea beside a man who treats me as an equal, and allow my daughter to exist at the edge of my life, respected, but no longer the center. I learned this: love is not always unconditional sacrifice. Sometimes love is knowing when to stop to protect yourself. Forgiveness does not happen in a day. And family isn't only blood, it's the people who stay when you have nothing left to give. Kindness needs boundaries, and sometimes distance itself is what allows love to heal. 1 year after launching New Beginnings, we held our first graduation ceremony. 18 women, ages 60 to 78, stood on stage in brand new business outfits, holding certificates and job referral letters. I watched from backstage and started crying, not out of sadness, but out of pride. Maria, 67, who had once been thrown out by her own son, was now the front desk manager at our hotel. Linda, 72, who had been left with nothing after a brutal divorce, now ran accounting for a restaurant chain. Janet, 65, who had cared for a sick husband for 20 years and was then abandoned, now taught cooking online with more than 50,000 followers. I walked onto the stage with no script, only the truth. Someone once told me that 68 was too late to start over. But today, I told a room of more than 200 women, it is never too late, too old, or too ordinary to deserve a good life. Then I told them, 2 years ago, my daughter abandoned me at Miami airport, took my passport, wallet, and phone, trying to teach me that I was a burden. But at the exact moment I was most desperate, a stranger reached out his hand, because he was lonely too, betrayed by his own children too. We saved each other not with romance, but with respect, by looking at each other as whole human beings. I spoke to those who feel invisible. You are not invisible, and your time is not over. You are simply between chapters, and the best chapter may not have been written yet. When I stepped down, the entire room stood in silence, hands over their hearts, like a promise that we were not alone. That afternoon, Warren and I sat on the beach behind the villa. Warren said Darius wanted to invest in new beginnings. I agreed to give Darius a chance, on one condition: 3 months of volunteering, to prove himself through action, not through a check. The following week, Sable's letter arrived. She wrote that she had begun therapy and realized she had punished me for her father's death, turning me into a monster so she wouldn't have to face the truth. Her father was at fault, and he chose alcohol over family. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She only said she was trying to live honestly, had repaid everything, and would wait until I was ready. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside the photo album she had once sent. I still didn't know when I would reply, but I knew that one day I would. If you see yourself in this story, remember this: you are not a burden. People call you that, so you will accept scraps and stop demanding more. But you deserve respect, love, and freedom. I started over at 68. Now I'm 70, running a business and helping hundreds of women start over. If I could do it, you can too. Forgiveness is not a moment. It is a process. There are peaceful days, and there are days you are still angry, and both are okay. Family is sometimes not blood, but the people who choose to stay. And please, never apologize for existing. You are allowed to take up space, to have needs, to be imperfect, and still be worthy of love. If you are at the airport of your life, remember this: sometimes the ground disappears not so you can fall, but so you can learn how to fly. And when you are ready, there will be a hand reaching out, not to save you, but to fly with you. I am Lorraine Devereaux. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And leave me a comment to help me. In your opinion, how is forgiving different from forgetting? I will read and respond to the most sincere shares.